Oh, good. You started the recording.
Yeah, I have my note right here. Start the recording.
Okay, maybe Bruce bought the calendar. So, but anyway, that was over the calendar.
Yeah, I always tell people at the museum, those little colored sticky notes, I know they're old school, but they really work.
They do. Yeah, the minute I look to my screen where the slides are, I see that big sticky thing. I said, why is that there? Well, we're only about a minute away from go time, so we'll let that minute expire and then go.
Okay, sounds good.
Did you ever watch the TV series Hell on Wheels? Do you know about that?
That is not familiar.
Oh my gosh!
What is it?
It was, like I said, it was a TV series. I can't remember which channel had it, and I don't know, maybe 2, 3 seasons. And it was the story of this one man. He was working for the trains coming from the east, and then he changed halfway and was working from the trains coming from the west, dealing with the Chinese, and it was the town, all the stories of the people in the town as it was moving along with the trains movies. If it was based on fact, they had real characters there, and fiction. It was just fascinating.
This is a TV series?
TV series, yeah. Hell on Wheels.
Well, I'll make a note of that.
It's just 2020. It was maybe 2015, 16, 17, something like that. I don't know. Fascinating.
Richard James.
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Okay, I think we've reached the magic hour. So, if you all remember, if you were here last time, I'm going to turn everybody's audio off here in a second, so that we can kind of go through the presentation without a whole lot of feedback or noise or interruption, so to speak. But in the meantime, while that's true, feel free to use the chat side of your online screen in order to ask questions or make comments or whatever you want to do, and I'll do my best to pay attention to that while we're going through this. So, any questions before I do that?
No.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to turn everybody's mute. Okay, so that means everybody's muted. Okay, so you should be seeing on your screen a map, lots of map stuff. And this is just to get us somewhat oriented before we get started here. This was the trip that we took, my wife and I, to go see this event in Promontory. And on the map, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, way up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see where Promontory Summit, Utah is, roughly is in that red box, which is where, of course, the 150th celebration occurred. Where we stayed was Ogden, Utah, which is the next little red box down from Promontory. And that was about the closest real town to Promontory, and it still was an hour and a half or something away. It was quite a little distance. And then, of course, south of there is Salt Lake City, and south of there is Heber City, which we'll note the importance of here in a minute, just to give you some idea of what else is going on. The upper right-hand corner map in the red is just the route we took from Colorado Springs, which is where the little red heart is. We went up north past Fort Collins through Laramie, which is where we joined I-80 going west, and then went all the way over to Ogden is where we stayed. And that was a really easy 2-day drive we did it in, so it wasn't too bad. All right, so that gives us an orientation of where we're going. Let me see if we can move on here. I mentioned Heber City, which was not too far away from Ogden. They have a railroad there, the Heber Valley Railroad, and they have a train that they refer to as the Heber Creeper, which I always think is kind of funny. And we were all set to ride that train on one of the afternoons that we were there, but sadly, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the picture, there's a lot of people around that train looking underneath it. It had derailed down there, and they were not able to get it back going in time for the afternoon excursion, whatever time that was. But under normal circumstances, it's well worth, I think, well worth the run down there if you're ever in the Salt Lake City area. Another thing that was going on at the time in Ogden, actually the day before the 150th celebration, was the ceremony with the recently restored at the time Big Boy, Union Pacific 4014. You can see pictured here with Ed Dickens, the main guy, standing out front on the locomotive platform. It was not possible to be a rail fan of any kind at that time and not be aware that a Big Boy was running around the West for whistle stops and a few little excursions and lots of viewing opportunities at stations and so on. It was a pretty big deal. And they coordinated their stop in Ogden to match up with the 150th, which took place the following day. So there was a big gathering in Ogden, downtown at the Union Station, or what was their train station. It's not active as a passenger station anymore. But the Utah State Railroad Museum is there. So Ogden is a pretty cool railroad spot in Utah with that museum. There's a page on the St. Louis Railroad Museum website that's all about the Spike150, which is what the organizers called this whole big event. Several days, and there's a page on the museum website with photos and stories of about 4 museum folks who were there. Me being one of them. I think Gary was there. He's on the line. And a couple others I don't remember offhand that shared some photos and stories. Oh, and by the way, before I forget to mention it, all the links and pages and stuff that I'm mentioning through this little presentation will be available on the Parlor Car Chats webpage probably tomorrow, maybe tonight, but I kind of doubt it. So you don't have to write anything down or whatever. You can always go to that page and find all these links. Okay, another little bit of preliminary stuff is a little map of the area around the Promontory Summit where the Golden Spike ceremony is. Right almost middle of the screen you see Golden Spike Promontory Summit and a yellow square that separates the red track from the yellow track. That's where this Golden Spike 150th celebration ceremony took place at the National Historic Park now. We'll talk about that in a minute. I show you this map mainly to explain to you why it's so in the middle of nowhere out there now. At one time it was on the railroad route between the east and the west, but that changed some time ago when the railroad did what is referred to as the loose-in cutoff. It saved about 44 miles. Instead of going the yellow-red route, it cut straight across from Ogden to Lucin across the Great Salt Lake. It saved 44 miles. Part of that orange mileage was an almost 12-mile-long trestle across the Great Salt Lake. This all happened in about 1904. And then in 1959, a causeway was completed that replaced the trestle. It was built next to the trestle, or while it was constructed alongside the trestle, and then when it was finally finished, the trestle was simply abandoned. So that's why Promontory Summit is currently out in the middle of nowhere, basically. And speaking of out in the middle of nowhere, that's a good view of what, if you swung around in any direction, you didn't see anything except what was going on at the 150th, which of course was a lot on this particular day. But otherwise, it's a whole lot of nothing out there. Let's see, okay. About the first thing I saw going in was one of the locomotives, the Jupiter. Let me get a picture of that up here. This was the one the Central Pacific Railroad, coming from the west, brought Leland Stanford and crew to the ceremony back then. And it's interesting, one of the fun stories I heard then and have recently reread on some of the websites, that the Jupiter was not the original locomotive that Stanford wanted or planned to show up with at Promontory Summit. He originally was going to be on a train pulled by a locomotive called the Antelope. But for some reason, the Antelope was following the regularly scheduled train that the Jupiter was pulling. The Antelope train with Stanford on it was following it as an extra. And as they were going through an area, a gorge near a logging camp, whether the extra signal was not properly displayed on the Jupiter, which was leading the two trains, or the workers at the logging camp didn't see the flag that indicated there was an extra train behind it. For whatever reason, the crew didn't recognize that there was a train behind it, and they dropped a big log or something into the gorge where the train was going through and damaged the Antelope, the locomotive that was pulling Stanford's train. So they switched the cars out. They were able to get the locomotive out of the way, and the Jupiter hooked up to the cars that the Antelope was pulling, and went on from there to Promontory Summit. There's the Union Pacific locomotive, the 119 that came from the east. Both of these locomotives were scrapped before anyone really anticipated how significant this event would be. In the case of the 119, I think they said somewhere along the line they got $1,000 when they scrapped this locomotive. And there wasn't a replica put in place until around 1979, when they started doing little ceremonies and reenactments at Promontory Summit. And the way you see the locomotive now, or at least this one, is based on a repainting of the locomotive that they did in 1994, when they found a Sacramento Bee newspaper article from 1869 that had something of a description of how that locomotive was originally painted. And this it was a very cryptic description, which basically only mentioned the main three colors that were used. But so we have now this scheme since about 1994. Another little interesting side note, that it's this locomotive, the 119, that was the basis for the character Bo in the Thomas and Friends series. There was a lot of ancillary things that I don't think are out at Promontory Summit all the time. This being one of them, a really well-restored stagecoach. And you'll see along the way here a number of other things that I think were brought in for the day, but having never been there before, I'm not entirely sure that it was just for the day, that some of this might have been there all along. It was fun to see that the area was patrolled by a posse, the sheriff's posse for the county, on horseback. We saw them, I wouldn't say they had a huge or great presence, but they were certainly there. There were a couple of them gathered for a little coffee break or chit-chat. If you were any kind of a publisher for rail-related stuff, particularly rail fan type stuff, you were there. I happened to catch this one Trains guy, a Trains magazine guy, but there were all kinds of these folks around. I got there probably 2 or 3 hours, something like that, before the ceremony actually started. And because of that, managed to catch a number of rehearsals that were going on for the show that they put on. This being a rehearsal for a production with the title of As One, which was the story of the Transcontinental Railroad and everybody coming together as one to make it happen. The Chinese workers, the Irish workers, the Native Americans, et cetera, et cetera. That's what this production was all about. And it was kind of fun. It was about a 20 or 30 minute thing. I don't remember exactly. If there is a recording of it on YouTube that you can watch the whole thing, and it will be in the links that I mentioned earlier on the Parlor Car Chats page. So instead of being in the 2 or 3 hour line that developed outside the park of people streaming in to see this event, I just wandered around, took pictures, and watched some rehearsals. There you can get a good idea of the broadcast stand, you might say. All kinds of cameras and equipment set up to record this event. There's another good angle of the volume of people there. Actually, we'll have a wider shot a little later on. There by the locomotive in the background is a kids' choir. There was at least one of those, and then the band off to the left, which is very hard to see because there's a lot of stuff in the way. But there was all kinds of participation by kids and band members, and of course the cast of the musical production. And in order for the world to see, I don't know how many satellite and relay dishes there were set up there, but there were quite a few. This was being broadcast out to the world, basically, including, I might mention, that As One, I think the whole thing, but at least the As One musical production was beamed to any school classroom that wanted to tune into it that day. So that was kind of cool. If you're any kind of a teacher particularly interested in rail fanning or railroads, then that would have been ideal for something to do. There were lots of characters out there. in all kinds of garb and dress. It was kind of fun. Some people really got into being there and doing their thing. Another angle of that camera stand. A lot of reenactments going on, not just the meeting of the two locomotives and the iconic shot of the clanking of the champagne bottles, but military, Civil War era military reenactments were going on at a location behind the building that you're seeing there in this picture is the actual visitor center, which I don't think was open that day on purpose. It's not that big, and it just would have been a hassle. At least I didn't manage to get into it if it was open. But back behind that building where these guys are marching, there was all kinds of displays. Oh, before I get to that, there's one of the sound system and video stations where it says Spike150. That was a big old TV screen that if you weren't very close to the stage, you could watch. And that hanging from that cable is a speaker bank to help the X number of people who are there to hear and listen. Here's that area I started to talk about, back behind the visitor center building. So this is the opposite side of where the locomotives are, the opposite side of the visitor center. And they had all kinds of displays up, and we'll just kind of run through what some of those look like. This Indian teepee, a bunch of displays. Here's a closer picture of them, mercantile, fables, tales. When I first saw this picture, when I was putting this together, I thought, oh my gosh, they're not social distancing. So, I mean, what do you... It's amazing how this corona thing has gotten into our head. So again, like I said, I don't know if these are up and operating all the time or if it was just for this day, but I suspect it was just for this day because it looked like a lot of work and it didn't look all that permanent. There was a Army camp, I assume Civil War style Army camp that was set up with some of the reenactment guys coming and going from there. Here's some of the other displays of stagecoaches and buckboards and all kinds of things that were of the era. Pardon these pauses. Every once in a while I'm checking to see if anybody's been chatting or making comments, and I'm not seeing any, so we'll just keep going on here. There's a close-up of a couple of the reenactment guys. As I recall, he was explaining something about that revolver that he had in his hand, or has in his hand. This was an interesting display. Also, back on this sort of exhibits and vendors side of the property, they took a lot of Golden Spike ceremony photos from the time that they had, blew them up to these big flats and hangings and whatnot that you could stroll through and enjoy out in the area. Probably some of the same pictures you would see if you could actually get in the visitor center. But that was fun. And you can see they did have descriptions of what you were seeing on each one, so you weren't totally on your own to figure out what was going on. Here's another set of them. It was hard. I would have probably had to take 10 more pictures to get every flat of photo covered. Since it's a photo, it wasn't that exciting, but it was cool to walk through and look at. More exhibits. This helicopter company was there. I don't remember exactly what they were doing, other than advertising themselves, maybe. Well, there's a few more of the characters that were out and about. My favorite, of course, being that Abe Lincoln photo. he was quite a character. Here's an example of one of the exhibits, some robotics college group, I think, brought this out. Very hands-on. The kids were allowed to play with the robots and stuff. They did a great job of having lots to do while you were waiting for the ceremony to start, along with 40,000 of your other close friends. Oh, there's the organization that provided the robotics, the Utah State University College of Engineering. Lego displays, people had put together Lego trains and stuff. It was kind of fun. The Air Force was there, recruiting, I presume, or just being supportive of the event. Oh, this is a good time to mention, this is obviously a picture of the sign in front of the Visitor Center. It says Golden Spike National Historical Park. If you had been there some number of months before this event, that would have read National Historical Site. What happened was the park got an upgrade in their status. I don't know the whole hierarchy of the Bureau of Land Management or the Interior, or whoever controls these things, but that was a promotion, you might say, which also explains why later on we'll see there were a number of dignitaries there that they might have been there for something as important as the 150th Railroad event, but you know, maybe not. But because of the new designation, they were there to promote that for sure. Here's a few more of the characters running about. And there's my photo of the moment, the iconic photo of the moment during the celebration when the champagne bottles are raised and the two engineers are leaning into the center, and all the workers in the original photo, all the workers surround the foreground. In this case, of course, it's not the workers, it's the attendees of the event. I don't know how many times they did this during the course of the day, but there was plenty of opportunity to grab whatever photo you wanted to of that shot. And thank goodness I had a telephoto lens of some sort. I was not very close to the stage. It was pretty hard to see stuff, but with the telephoto lens, it was much helpful. There's our friendly posse guys again, and that's a good shot of the nothingness that's out there under normal circumstances. That top picture gives you an idea of the cars that were streaming into the site for hours before the actual program. The line was long and somewhat slow. When I came in early in the morning, several hours before the program was to start, this line got to be much thicker and much slower as time approached. And in fact, cars were still coming in after the program had already started because they had not quite allowed enough time to get there. The picture underneath is that band that I talked about earlier that was supporting the kids' choir and supporting the musical. They were rehearsing. This is one of their rehearsal times. Here's a nice little sepia shot of the Jupiter with the crowd in front of it. I think the program had started by now. I'm not entirely sure if it did or if this is still rehearsal, but I put this to note that there were Chinese dragon dancers that were there. This was definitely a multi-ethnicity celebration with the Chinese, the Irish, the Native Americans, This dance troupe was provided by the Chinese Railroad Workers Descendants Association. They played a pretty significant part in this. It was separate from the As One musical. This was its own event. Like I said, the Native Americans were represented. A lot of the dignitaries took a few minutes to speak. John Meacham was the keynote speaker. I don't know if I have a picture of him in this or not. Gave an excellent, I thought, 10 or 15 minute keynote speech during this thing. And if you go to the Spike150 page, you can find a link to that speech if you want to hear that too. Here's a little more of the festivities going on. The honor guard doing the flag salute and the raising of the flag, I think we'll see here in a minute. Here are my two best shots to give you some notion of what the crowd looked like from wide angle. They say there was close to 40,000 people there. I believe it. It was a multitude, that's for sure. So at the top picture, you're sort of looking to the left of the stage. There's the other screen up there at the top, the other big screen, and the bottom of the speaker column that was hanging. And then the bottom picture where it says 40,000 people is to the right of the stage. You see the screen that was set up to the right of the stage, the video screen, I mean, and the speakers and so on. So that gives you some idea of what the crowd kind of felt like. And here's a little bit of idea of the dignitaries that were there that day. The only one I'm sure of in this picture is Mitt Romney there in the middle. But also the governor of Utah was there, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Representative Bishop, I assume, is a Utah congressman, Lance Fritz, who I don't think is in that picture, of the Union Pacific Railroad, was there and talked. The Irish ambassador, the Chinese ambassador, actually talked to the crowd via satellite. He was not there in person, but he was there on the monitor screens. And a lot of, like I said, a lot of the reason that some of those folks were there anyway had to do with the fact that the park got an upgrade from historical site to historical park. There's another view of the dignitaries, some of them. The woman in red is, her last name is Chow. She's the Secretary of the Interior, I believe. And I can't name any of the rest of them offhand. There's some more of them, and they just get more and more and more. They set a wreath, kind of a memorial wreath, like you do on Memorial Day at a military cemetery, to honor everybody who contributed to this construction project. The coverage, of course, was pretty incredible. This guy was probably had the best view of anybody. I got to be up there in that hoist bucket, keeping an eye on everything. Hopefully he had a good zoom lens too to get in close when he wanted to. Here's the raising of the flag. There's a flagpole there, an old wooden flagpole that is at the site and flies the flag every day, I assume. And so here they are raising the flag, and you notice it's a 20-star flag, I think it is. Well, however many stars there were when the Golden Spike ceremony took place. Oh, I just got a comment. Elaine Chao was the Secretary of Transportation, not interior. Thank you for that. Thanks for the correction. When I met her and worked with her a little bit, she was the Secretary of Labor, and we were working on space industry type stuff and workforce for space industry. So, pardon the wrong title I gave her, but I didn't really follow her career after she left the Department of Labor. Here, some Chinese workers are bringing in a hunk of rail as part of the ceremony. Every time I see this shot, it just reminds me of the movie Groundhog Day, or any shots you see from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania on Groundhog Day. The dignitaries of that event are always dressed the same way, with the top hats and the suits, and they're trying to talk to Punxsutawney Phil to find out what the weatherman's doing. Well, they had the same sort of celebration here. Of course, these are not supposed to be groundhog guys. These are railroad dignitaries and so on who were there that day, 150 some years ago, for this celebration. They do a little reenactment of the driving of the Golden Spike. Later, however, I found out what it's telling you in the upper right-hand corner there, that the actual last spike, not the ceremonial golden spikes, but the actual last spike, and the rail where it was at the spot where that last spike was being driven, were actually wired electronically to the telegraph system, so that whoever was listening around the world, conceivably, could hear, quote unquote, the driving of the actual last spike. I thought that's pretty cool. That's the ambassador from Ireland to the United States and his wife, who raised a glass of champagne to everyone who was in attendance. And I tell you, by the time this happened, I was ready for a glass of champagne too, but they did not have a champagne bar anywhere. Here's a moment in the actual show that they performed, the one called As One. It's, you can, if you weren't clear what I was saying, up there in the upper left-hand corner, you can see it written. This was the musical written to commemorate the occasion, broadcast live to classrooms across the United States. And if you want to see the show, lots of singing, dancing, kind of telling the story, including the Chinese workers, the Irish workers, etc. It is kind of fun. The 20 to 30 minutes is probably the right length for a production like that, but it was good. Lots of activity. You can see the kids' choir off to the left. There's a little bit closer picture of the video screen and the speaker stand and some of the equipment that was out there for doing the recordings and doing the showing on the screen. You can see that if you were back in the crowd a little ways, those screens probably came in real handy, because there's no way you would see that good a view of the stage. There's another kind of a wide shot or longer shot of the crowd. There's the Jupiter, number 60, at the time. There's kind of a longer shot of the whole setting. This is actually on my way out, headed towards the parking lot. I had left the crowds behind, and it kind of made a nice old-fashioned kind of shot of the situation. There you can get a good view of that flagpole that I was talking about. Basically, two telephone pole-like timbers strapped to each other to get it up however many feet they wanted to get it up. And the crowd, even though there's a good fraction of the crowd still there, you don't really sense that they're there in this photo. There was fireworks that occurred later in the afternoon during the day. That was interesting, broad daylight. So they weren't maybe quite as impressive as they otherwise might have been. And these photos, unfortunately, didn't pick up on the colors that were in. There was some color to these, but for some reason, my camera didn't pick that up very well. And we had a fighter jet formation fly over. I think this immediately followed the fireworks. I'm not sure, but that was kind of cool. I don't know. I never did find out where they came from or who they were representing. They weren't, obviously, these are not the Thunderbirds or the Angels or any of the flying teams. This must have been a more local base. But like I said, I never did find out. It was a little daunting to find your car out there on the way out. With 40,000 people there, what do you figure? Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 cars, maybe. It was a little hard, but fortunately, I made note of a few landmarks on the way in, and it didn't take too long to find it. And speaking on the way out, from the car, camera in hand, through the window, I took this shot of the Jupiter, or not the Jupiter, the 119, as it was returning. It's backing away from the point of meeting the other locomotive and returning to its either its staging location for another meetup reenactment or heading back to the barn. I'm not sure which. I wasn't there long enough to see how far or where it went. But again, that's a little closer to giving you the idea of what that locomotive looks like sitting out there when there's not 40,000 people there. And just to give you a little better picture of the area, in the top picture is the northern end of the Great Salt Lake Basin. The tip of the lake itself doesn't really come up into this picture. You can certainly see that there's lowlands and small bodies of water. The lake itself would be much further away and down to the right in this picture. It's a pretty big area. The lake is huge, and the basin that it's part of is even bigger. The lower picture is coming down into the valley where Ogden is located. So this is an hour or so, I forget exactly, away from Promontory Summit, coming into the valley where Ogden is, which is where we stayed. I mentioned this earlier, but just to drive it home, if you really want to see a bunch of pictures and more stories, read a little bit more story about museum members who attended this event and took pictures and so on, this is the page to go to. This is on the museum website. And you can see there that I was there, Ed, I forgot his name, was there, Gary was there, and Brad was at least in the area. I'm only aware of the big boy photos that he took, but he may well have been at the Spike150 too. And so if you go to those links on that page, you can see my pictures, Ed's pictures, Gary's pictures, some of the stories that we saw and talked about. And again, that link will be on the Parlor Car page. Being a new Coloradan now, I would be a little bit remiss in not sharing this story with you, which I found interesting, fascinating, funny, who knows. There is a group of people who maintained that the Golden Spike ceremony at Promontory Summit that we just celebrated the 150th anniversary of did not, in fact, create transcontinental railroad entirely. And by entirely, I mean it wasn't 100% rail from East Coast to West Coast when the Golden Spike was driven at Promontory Summit. There was a bridge. There was not a rail bridge across the Missouri River at that time that hooked Council Bluffs, Iowa to Omaha, Nebraska, which was part of the the quote-unquote Continental Railroad. It didn't come until 1872, which was several years later. So this little town in Colorado, Strasburg, Colorado, which is not too far from where I live, claims that they drove the Golden Spike that actually hooked rail, 100% rail from East Coast to West Coast on August 15th of 1870, which, if you do the 150th kind of math to that date, you'll realize that their 150th anniversary is coming up this coming August 15th. So I'm pretty sure I will be there unless some crazy thing prevents me, just to see what's going on. It was the Kansas Pacific Railroad at this point of the journey, or making the connection, that put together this last piece of rail for the whole thing. So there you go. They don't get a whole lot of attention. Not too many people really buy into that. You know, with 99.9999 something of the rail and the big deal that was made out of Promontory Summit, there's no way that these guys will become anything more but an interesting little side note. But I'm going to go find out just how big a side note. Now, maybe we'll do another one of these days again about that. Okay, so that's it. Before I forget, let me go back and turn everybody on again if there's any live questions. This last slide is just to remind you that there is that Parlor Car Chats page that you can find out, well, you can get recordings, eventually anyway, of previous presentations. If you would do a feedback survey at that second address that's on there, it would really help us pick topics and better dates and times if there are such. We're going to try and, from here on, try and keep doing these at least weekly, one a week, until at least until the museum opens again. We'll see. And then also to announce that next Saturday, June 6th, we'll do a rail route guide presentation again, similar to last time we did San Luis to Santa Barbara. This one will be San Luis to Paso Robles. So let me see. I see somebody might have
Signal.
Oh, somebody's asking for a repeat of the Spike 150. There's that page, the address. Oh, he's saying it doesn't work. Yeah, the S is, it does have to be exactly like that. The S in Spike has to be capital. So that helps. Or you can just go to the Parlor Car page tomorrow and just click on the link over there.
What time is the launch?
I think I heard somebody ask the time of the launch. If that's there is a pretty significant launch scheduled today. The SpaceX Crew Dragon is going to launch with 2 men on board to go to the International Space Station. It's our meaning the United States re-entry into manned spacelift ever since the shuttle program got stopped. And that launch, the time of that launch, California time, is 12:22 this afternoon. So it's not very far away, like an hour and a half or something. So if that helps whoever was asking.
I read that it was 4:33 Eastern time, so that's different.
Yeah, I think it's 1:22, or it's 22.
Yeah, so 1:22 and not 12:22.
Yeah, I thought it was 1:22 Mountain, which would make it 12:22 Pacific.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll check.
But I could be wrong. If you want to watch it, it's on Facebook. They're doing a live coverage, and I'm sure any number of SpaceX.com, I'm sure will have live coverage, and probably other places too.
But that was outstanding. Take those photos. It's like we were right there, and even better than being there. We didn't have to deal with the crowds or the cars. I mean, all those close-ups of the engines. I'm very impressed with your presentation. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anything else anybody wants to cover or add? Someone asked if the SLO to Santa Barbara presentation was recorded. The answer is yes, at least most of it. I forgot to turn the recording on until about 15 minutes into it. But I took what recording we did get and added to the front of it the slides that we covered during the earlier 10 minutes, and that is, access to that recording is on the ParlorCar website. If you scroll down, the first thing you see on that website is the upcoming scheduled presentations. Once you get past them, then you get to a section that's called completed presentations, and there's only one completed so far until we get done with this one. And it has a link to the recording of that section. Someone else is asking about, is there an easy way to log on to these? The easiest way I know is to go to the ParlorCar chats page and click on the video and audio link that's there. You don't have to download anything, nothing to install, just do it. Okay, I think that wraps it up. Thank you all for attending, and we will see at least some of you, I hope, next Saturday for the San Luis to Paso Robles rail route.
Thank you. Thank you. Have an awesome day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Start my day.
Thank you.
Later.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.